Hey guys, so welcome back. The Ukraine-Russia crisis, we really need to end this, but in order to end something, we have to figure out how it really started, and not necessarily as a conflict between Ukraine and Russia, because we've been given all of the pieces of the puzzle, and we are ignoring the crux of how we got here. It was years in the making, and yes, Putin planned this. Yes, it is really all Putin's fault because he is driving this. However, yes, I do believe it is Germany's fault, and I don't think that we have to pace ourselves in advancing some of these debates, dialogues, and discussions because we don't really have much time. Under normal circumstances, I think it is kind of safe to say like, oh, well, let's not point fingers, let's not do this. But no, really, Germany got us into this mess. The United States added some fire, and of course it's all over oil. And it involves a term called realpolitik that the Germans forgot, even though they made up the term. Whose fault is the whole Russia-Ukraine crisis? How are we going to get out of it? What is Putin's endgame? In order to understand Putin's endgame, we also have to see how this game started and who the players were. Of course, Russia is the ultimate person at fault. However, because this is YouTube and this is not like some sort of like, place where you have to be like super politically correct with like if this was like a mainstream media discussion with ambassadors and stuff, when a burglar comes into town, he'll go and try to go for the unlocked doors first. Who left the door to the European Union unlocked? It was Germany, because they forgot who they were playing with, and then also they forgot about this key political term called realpolitik. So what is realpolitik? Why do I bring it up? It's essentially a school of thought within international relations on how you can essentially predict the behavior of another country or an opponent or an ally. Essentially, what this school of thought was, and when I first learned it, I was just like, this seems so old and so outdated, and we don't do things like that anymore in the modern age. I think that's also kind of where Germany also lost its way, because after living in Korea, yes, we are supposed to be a modern democracy, but there's a lot of realpolitik going on here, and a lot of the world still operates under an authoritarian model. So realpolitik essentially is a study of politics that says that might makes right. The washed-down version, if you look it up on Merriam-Webster dictionary, so not good. It says, a system of politics or principles based on practical rather than moral or ideological considerations. Let me give you another definition from a little bit more of a shadier dictionary. It says, political realism or practical politics, especially policy based on power rather than ideals. So, when you had a lot of the political scientists from like the Soviet era, like the 1980s or the Cold War, or when you are dealing with a period of history where a lot of the European nations were competing for colonies, the study of realpolitik essentially was, well, if another country is stronger, has more military, and there's a vulnerability, they will take over. Like, it's essentially that kind of concept that if you have the power, you're going to not only use it, but abuse it, and therefore you can predict what would happen. So that was part of like the arms race as well. If they have more nukes, then they're going to, and we have this much, then they're going to become the dominant power. They're going to take us over. Or, even in like maybe like the workplace, if your boss has unrestricted power, you are definitely going to be abused. Now, how does that differ from other schools of thought that emerged over time that said like, okay, realpolitik, I don't know, that's a little bit old school. It's basically like, your grandfather's dictator's way of doing life. There's many different other schools, but one that I think Germany fell into was this concept of interdependence. That the more we trade together, the more we make relations together, we're not going to want to bully each other. There's no reason. We have a mutual business interest. So, for example, Russia already with the Nord Stream 1 project, which we'll get into, basically the pipeline. This is essentially like why we're all in this mess. Supplying 40% of European Union's gas. They'll be like, well, it's the German position, and I'd like to sometimes say like it might not necessarily be the entire country's position, but it could be just the politicians driving it at a certain time. But basically they were saying that Russia needs as much of this partnership as we do theirs, so they won't do anything with this. It's just business. We'll separate business and politics because they need our money. They're saying like, well, all you people who are concerned that Russia's going to blackmail us by basically saying like, oh, well, we don't agree with you on this policy, you better come on our side and, vote against like countries like the United States and give us more power. Otherwise, we're going to shut off your gas during the peak of winter. They said, oh, they wouldn't do that because that just harms relations and we are going to be mutually beneficial. They need our money. How dumb is that? Realpolitik started in Germany in 1853 when they were trying to, I guess, figure out something about like the German states unifying. Basically, there were some political scientists back then who really knew about power, coalitions, social forces, and how that all influences politics. But essentially the operative word there is power. Whoever has more power is going to get their way, whereas a lot of these other concepts that started to develop as we started to develop as civilizations was that no, just because I can rob you doesn't mean I'm going to rob you. I don't live like that. That is not who we are. We do things on a mutual win-win partnership. I'm not going to invade you just because I have more weapons than you might at this certain point. It's not in my self-interest. So I think as we modernized in some parts of the world, we forget that people in other parts of the world are still operating under, obviously, an authoritarian regime. So you're not trading with a democratic capitalist country, and they are under the model of realpolitik. And as we've seen more and more of kind of like opening up the boxes in the way that societies are structured around the world, there's a lot more authoritarianism than a lot of people in like maybe the bubbles of Western society care to admit or even understand to begin with. So Germany, I think in terms of the public, the civil society, forgot that a lot of the world operates under realpolitik. So if you're working with somebody like Putin, and if he is now eventually going to supply 80% of the gas to the EU, you better believe he's going to transfer that into political leverage, hold you under the gun, blackmail you constantly, and increase step by step his power position within the European continent, and then who knows where else he wants to go. Dictators are never full or satisfied. They're always hungry. That poor little boy just still wants his toy, but he can't get it. So how did Germany get us into this mess? So right now, I want to bifurcate Germany as a country, because sometimes I really don't like it when people say like, oh, you know, the United States did this. No, there were some people who hijacked the government in the United States who did certain things under the name of the United States, similar to what I think happened in Germany. Essentially, we had this project in Germany called Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2. Nord Stream 2 was almost about to be open this year, but then because of this whole Ukraine situation, they halted it. But Nord Stream 1 has been operational for about 10 years. When did it get its start? It got its start under Gerhard Shroeder and Angela Merkel's predecessor, and then she basically inherited this project. And on the surface, of course it makes sense. Of course. But Schroeder seems a little shady, but we'll get into the shady part of like why I don't say like Germany did this. Essentially, I think Schroeder did this and Germany then had to kind of go along because who's going to give up cheap oil? So what the Nord Stream pipeline, if you haven't really followed it, this is essentially why we're in this mess. It transports liquefied natural gas directly from Russia under the Baltic Sea to Germany. That means they basically have like their own, it's like a private elevator, you know, like the way that they were giving gas to Europe was through Ukraine. But Ukraine, you always had to kind of like, Russia always had to pay Ukraine about $2 billion a year for the access. So, you know, let's say somebody, you know, wants to like use your elevator, but you can charge them for it. So that's what Ukraine was doing. There was a lot of conflict around the licensing fees. And so Russia came up with a solution that was different to go a different way, sidestep any country so that you don't have to pay anybody, and then deliver it straight to Germany. And so Gerhard Schroeder was a huge proponent of it. He was so chummy with Vladimir Putin. And it looked like it made sense because gas is expensive. It needs to power German businesses and then the rest of the European Union. Russia historically has supplied gas historically for over 50 years, and apparently they were very dependable. They were, you know, seemingly like a reliable gas supplier as a partner. So in that sense, I think people were just like, well, maybe on the gas thing, they're not gonna, you know, play too much hanky-panky. But after Gerhard Schroeder left office, he became like the spokesperson, the spearheaded person in Germany for the Nord Stream project, and then became a board member on many Russian energy companies. So he was essentially like a representative of Russia. Angela Merkel seemed like she had to carry out the deal, and I'm just judging based on her body language, her expressions. It seemed like she also had reservations and did not want to go along with it, but it seemed like everything was tilted against her. Her mentor had started this project. Germany needed oil and needs even more oil. The reason why they needed to even have Nord Stream 2 was when Nord Stream 1 opened, that's when they, in Germany, decided let's get off of nuclear and let's almost get out of coal. So the renewables, like they can't do all the wind and solar, I guess. So they need to find another alternative, and they have to even rely even more on liquid natural gas. Russia was offering, they paid for half of the pipes, and then the others were done by consortiums of many different multinational oil companies. So it seemed like it would solve a lot of problems if you sort of just trusted that Putin would not be a bad actor. And so even up until like the beginning of this year, people were believing that he wouldn't be a bad actor. However, they forgot the fundamental principles of realpolitik. If someone can blackmail you, they will. If somebody can force you to do something, they will. And if somebody is supplying 80% of your gas, don't think that that is a mutual partnership. Nah. You down here, you the underdog, and they're the top dog. Before they miss their money, you're gonna miss their oil. So who has leverage in that conversation and that kind of environment? Of course it's going to be Russia. And it opens up the door for so many back-channeled diplomacy in order for Russia to get its way by always threatening the oil supply. You don't think that they planned it that way? If you didn't, you do not belong in the government. You do not belong in public policy making. Even though, like when I was studying it, I was like, oh, like, realpolitik, that sounds so like, whoever does that, they're just probably just like, like a old kind of Reagan era type of, policy wonk who's just like not with the times. But you're not with the times if you're only dealing with other advanced democratic nations, which, even there it's debatable. But if you are dealing with a strongman, a dictator, and you already see that he is a dictator and he blends state-owned enterprises and the Kremlin, basically there is no difference between business and politics, then Germany, you were the dumb people for bringing us into this mess by going forward and putting us in this vulnerable situation. It's like living in an apartment complex and Germany always leaves the front door open. Always. Never locks the door and puts all the other people at risk. Now, the realpolitik situation in that apartment building metaphor is that if you leave the door unlocked, you're gonna get robbed. The other kind of, theories is like, no, not everybody wants to rob, and what's the value of stealing in this modern age, and who would want to do that? Okay, Pollyanna, get a grip, or just, stay home. And so we are dealing with a situation where Germany just left the door open. And again, I don't want to say Germany. I want to say particularly Schroeder. I think it's super his fault. And he sort of created the lock on the front door that really had no lock, and everybody else had to live with this door because everyone was just like, dude, why are you stressing out so much? We're getting cheap oil. Now, the reason why I say the United States also has a role in this is that, yes, they are adding pressure here, but even though, I may have some other opinions about, US intervention throughout history, on this case, I think the United States was essentially kind of like the neighbor next door or in the next building being like, look guys, look, lock your front door. If you start to get robbed, then we're gonna start to get robbed. This neighborhood's gonna turn into a crime infested neighborhood because people see us as easy targets. Ever since, I believe, Bush, Obama, Trump, and I think even Clinton, all of these administrations looked at this, and thank God there were some people with realpolitik experience, or anybody. You know what? Anybody here in Korea, a third grader would see you left the front door open and this was a stupid move, because we still kind of live in this authoritarian world. But the United States, officially, maybe not Trump personally, but all of the administration said that this is one of the dumbest moves that you can make because suddenly you will be Putin's lapdog. You will not be able to get off of this oil addiction. You will not be able to say no. There will be no boundaries. with Putin. Of course, everyone's like, oh, no, like, cheap oil, cheap oil, cheap oil. And now, I think because of this Ukraine invasion, people are waking up in the European Union and thinking like, okay, even if, we have this oil deal right now and we need the 40%, so we're just kind of like, okay, well, we're fighting you, but here, let's still trade the oil. I don't think it could go back. I think once somebody brings a gun to a negotiation, the dynamics have changed. You can't trust them. You know what their true colors are. You know what they're capable of and what they're willing to do in order to win that negotiation. And so now I think all the Pollyannas probably in Germany have woken up and been like, oh, well, that's who we were doing business with. I guess if they have 80% and if they're willing to do all of that in Ukraine, then, I don't know if I trust this guy anymore. I don't know if this is such a good... You should have locked your door. You should have locked the door to the apartment building and not have threatened the lives of everybody else, just so that you could have your gentleman caller come in whenever you wanted for some cheap oil. Not only this, because it's going through the Baltic Sea, you already had red flags that Russia was up to something, because there were environmental concerns, and I don't think Russia was really concerned about the environment, but they were saying to uphold the environmental standards of the construction, we can send in our Navy and just have it patrol. People were like, you guys wake up. They're going to use this pipeline, even from the construction, about environmental issues that they probably don't care about. And going forward, they're going to use this as some sort of excuse to add more Russian naval ships in the Baltic Sea, which touch upon many nations in the EU. And so you're going to have a Russian naval warship right on your shore, and their excuse is we're just looking after the pipeline, making sure that the oil is running through properly and that, no fishies get, decimated because of this. Boom. Russian military presence in that area. You guys, wake up, because authoritarianism is still real. People still live according to that sort of credo and principle and desire to control, subjugate, and dominate other people and have them follow like lackeys. EU, you almost had that situation come to your doorstep because of this gas pipeline. Yes, the United States probably exerted a heavy hand to try to stop this, but in this case, and I hate nosy neighbors and I hate people who meddle and I hate the Karens who call, but they sort of Karenized, this. And in this case, it seemed like appropriate because they were trying to save you from making a critical geopolitical mistake. So I don't think Schroeder was naive. I think he had an agenda and he made sure that this went through. He is not naive in realpolitik. The people he sold it to under all of the arguments that were non-realpolitik bought it hook, line, and sinker, and I think those are the people at fault. So right now, because this gas pipeline is going to Germany, and this is the crux of it, is Russia is trying to figure out how it's going to send its oil through Ukraine, which is now blocked, which now they're fighting over. And if they win it, then they're not going to have to pay any gas fees and they can just do whatever they want to, use the old pipes, even though they're less efficient, but they can use that. Nord Stream 1 is still in operation, but Nord Stream 2, which would have doubled their capacity, they already paid for it. It's all done. It's all complete. Apparently, it's all full of gas right now, and they just need to, flip the switch, and then it'll just go straight into Germany. That has been halted. It was not finally approved. And so now what you're looking at is Russia is not able to sell the oil it expected to the EU. I mean, the smart thing for the EU would basically be like, okay, well, after this is all over and stuff, even if we turn on Nord Stream 2, we got to figure out a different way, because we can't do business with someone like that, because it will be any single day where from the Kremlin, yeah, dude, I need you to vote this way with me on the UN Security Council. Dude, I need you to go against the US on this. Dude, I need you to come and polish my shoes. There's gonna be absolutely no end to the amount of requests and boundary violations that the Kremlin would make once they supply 80% of your oil. Now, South Koreans, I think, would look at this and be like, who is the idiot who let this happen? Because even as much as we are always trading and always dependent, we understand that once somebody gets that position, they will abuse it, because Korean people do it. Korean people do it to each other. Once Korean people get the power position, they will abuse you, no matter what. Now, the line between people's understanding of opportunity versus opportunism, there is none in Korea. The line between capitalism, like a free market, versus monopoly, there is no conception. Everything is a monopoly. And so people, when you talk to them about well, but this is capitalism, it's not a free market. They're like, well, then why wouldn't somebody want to try to make as much money as they can? What, even abusing the laws of capitalism? But to them, that is the law of capitalism. The law is about monopolizing, taking advantage, and but under the guise of trying to make as much money as you can. But in that case, it is not capitalism. It is not a free market. It is a manipulated market. It is an oligarchical market. And let's just be honest here, the South Korean economy was set up under a command structure by a dictator, and he gave oligarchical rights to corporate interests. And so, like I said, there's a lot of parallels that you can see in South Korean society, and hopefully not as bad as Russia, but in terms of the power game, Korean people see, like I said, a 5-year-old can see this. And so this is Germany's fault mainly. That's how I'm seeing it right now. Because Sun Tzu said that you must give your enemy a golden bridge to retreat. So Putin has even said before in his biographies that, when he was growing up in a 1-bedroom apartment with his parents all poor, he saw a caged rat or a cornered rat. And he said, never fight a cornered rat because they have nothing to lose. So in this situation, we have to not corner Putin. We have to give him a golden bridge to somewhere. And my theory is that it will have to be a bridge built on gas. There has to be some sort of smart way where you can still lock the door to that apartment building to the EU and still allow Putin to flow more oil, and where he doesn't feel as threatened. And that would give you more oil in the short run. The other aspects of NATO encroaching upon Russia, or him trying to create a Russian empire, I would say Those are probably secondary, and so use those more as leverage points. But I think the main issue here is that he has to figure out a way to sell his oil. And apparently it's a little bit more difficult to send it the other direction through pipelines to China because of the distance, because most of the main economic centers of Russia is on the European side, and most of the main economic centers of China is on the Asia side. So it's like like a huge way to cross over land, and there's mountains and Tibet. I mean, doesn't the Himalayas get in the way or somewhere? Perhaps what could happen is that oil that is sent from Russia to Germany can then be sold as if it was like an Amazon or a Walmart of oil to the world. Maybe Germany can become a huge reseller of Russian oil, because I think they also need to buy more from other sources. So perhaps there can be some sort of a deal where Germany essentially has to buy 2 or 3 times more oil than it needs from various sources around the world and sell the excess to other countries. And therefore, boom, there you go. You have a new industry and you have new jobs in Germany, and also, parts of the EU that can be involved in this Russian oil reselling market. And to pledge that this Russian oil is not used in the EU, but rather just sent out around the world, because if they're going to pipe it over to Germany anyway, I guess, something like that, so that so oil supply sources are diversified. In Korea, Russia was South Korea's 4th largest oil supplier. So we get Saudi Arabia, United States, Kuwait, and then Russia. And that's crude oil. And for gas, it's our 6th largest supplier. The reason why I say that this might be possible is that, did you know that one of Korea's biggest export items, or I believe the number 1 export out of Korea, is not semiconductors, but actually refined gas? We have absolutely no oil in this country, and yet it is our top export item. How? We buy all of the gas from different sources and we refine it, and then what we don't use, we sell off to other nations, and it becomes a huge export commodity and part of our GDP. So perhaps Germany and other EU countries that were supposed to be involved in this whole Nord Stream gas pipeline and, use it throughout Europe, the European Union, can adopt a similar model to South Korea, where you get the gas and then you resell it and it becomes an export item. And at the same time, you are having to import others or find other sources of energy so that you are energy diversified. But in any event, you should know who you're dealing with. This is Putin. So I'd say strike a deal, let him get his oil somewhere, and make him stop. And if not, then maybe it can be under a provisional situation where you don't stop any of the sanctions, but you let them sell more oil. Say, sell more oil, make more money through your oil, but we are going to keep the sanctions alive on everything. And if you start up your funny business again, we're even gonna stop buying your oil. There you go. I just solved the world crisis right here on YouTube. So what do you think? Do you think that there is a place for Germany to take its responsibility and find a solution? Because this is a pipeline that goes to your country. This whole oil situation, this whole oil mess was because y'all so thirsty for this oil. We're all thirsty for oil, but you chose badly to leave the apartment door open to satisfy your thirst. So that ain't cool. So the rest of the homeowners association, they're looking at you, Germany, in apartment 2B. You better get your stuff together and get rid of the cockroaches, lock your doors, make a new system so that everybody is safe. All right, guys, I'll talk to you later. Hope all is well. Stay safe out there. Pray for Ukraine and everybody else who's going through a hard time right now. All right, bye.
Tune in next time. Don't forget to subscribe. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Love you.